Welcome back. Hopefully you're getting comfortable moving around in the Blender space. And if you did the previous tutorial, you should have a cool stone lantern for your scene. We made that lantern using the default cube and simple face modeling. That's fine for hard surface man-made stuff, but what about more organic shapes? Let's jump back into Blender and learn some other ways of working. Make sure you're in object mode. Look up in the upper left and see if it says object. If it says edit, then hit your tab key. If you add new mesh in edit mode, you're adding it to that object, and we're going to add a plane to our scene to be the beach sand. And if we add it inside of the edit mode of our lantern, then the plane will be stuck inside the lantern model, and we won't be able to move them around separately. So checking that you are in object mode, hit the tab key if you're not, hold Shift and A to get the add menu, Shift A. Okay, there is an add menu at the top of the scene, but just Shift A is a really good one to learn right at the start as you need it so often. So Shift A and hover over the very top option, Mesh, to open the flyout menu to the side, and then select Plane also at the very top. A single polygon should appear in the center of the world, or wherever your 3D cursor was if it wasn't in the center. If it wasn't, then just undo, and then use the Shift S and select Cursor to World Origin to put it back in the center, and then add that plane again. Obviously, this little plane is way too small for our beach, so let's hit the tab key to get into the edit mode for the plane. We want to scale it up, but rather than just hit the S key and drag randomly, hit the S key and then type 20, and enter or return. And that quick action just made it 20 times bigger, and that should be enough for our beach. The trouble now is that we just have one big square with only 4 vertices at the corners. There's no way to add our rolling sand dunes unless we add a lot more edges to the plane. If I select an edge now and move it, all I can do is slant that single face. So we have to chop up this face a lot more. So you can just watch this a little bit if you want. I'm going to show you an important way to add edges, although we're not going to use this method right now. But this is an important thing to learn. So I'm going to hit the 2 key, the one above the letters, not the one on the number pad, to get into edge mode. And then I'm going to move my cursor near one of the edges of the plane. And then I'm going to hit Control R. And that's adding an edge loop or a ring loop, if that helps you remember the Control R for ring loop. Now, with that one added, I can roll up the scroll wheel and add a bunch more, or roll it back to take them away. I can click once and slide the edges around, and then I can click a second time. Of course, I can just double click in the first place to set the edges. Now I can select one of the edges and move it around. So this is a very important way of adding complexity to basic shapes. But for what we need right now, there's an even faster way. So I'm going to Control Z to undo those last steps till I get back to the scaled up plane. And you should do that too if you were following along with adding the cuts. I'm going to hit the 3 key to switch back to face mode. And then I'm going to select the face of the plane. Blender has a lot of right-click context-sensitive menus. Here, right-click on the face and see that a whole bunch of stuff has appeared in the face context menu that pops up. The one we want is Subdivide. That will chop up the single face into 4 faces. That's a start, but we want a lot more than that. Notice the adjustment menu has also appeared. So click down in the number of cuts field and type 32. If you have a fast computer, you can make that number higher, but 32 will be enough for our simple scene. And now you can see that the plane has been evenly divided into a little more than 1,000 faces. So now if we switch to vertex mode, hit the 1 key, we can select any vert and move it around. Well, now we have a lot more resolution to play with, but moving each one of these around one at a time will take forever. Well, that's where proportional editing mode can come in. This is the little dartboard icon at the top center of the viewport. That toggles on and off proportional editing. Hitting the O key on the keyboard does the same. The little drop-down menu to the right here shows how the vertices will react. The default smooth is fine for what we're doing right now. Just know that there are other options. I'll click on a vert with proportional editing on and move it up. Well, that's anticlimactic. How is that any different than what we were just doing? Well, there is an area of influence that's probably set pretty small when you first turn on proportional edit. So I'll undo this. And this time, instead of using the move gizmo, I'll hit the G key. Remember G for grab or move. And I'll scroll up with the mouse wheel. You can also page up and page down, the buttons on your keyboard. That gray circle is the area of influence, and vertices inside the circle will be affected. And you can even move a little bit and then scroll up and down after you started moving the verts. Now that's better. All right, so now click or enter to set the move. And then take a few moments and push down the edges of that far corner as it's sort of going down to the water, and then raise up 2 dunes on either side of the lantern. Just rough it in for now, and then don't forget to turn off proportional edit mode when you're done by clicking on the icon or hitting the O key. Weird things can happen when you forget you have it on. So let's add some rocks. There are a lot of ways to add rocks and random organic shapes, but let's make a few by hand to give you some more modeling practice. Make sure you're in object mode and Shift A to add a mesh, and this time select icosphere from the list. And then if your icosphere is buried down in your sand, just move it up so you can see it. Hit the 1 key on the number pad or one of the green knobs on the navigate gizmo to get into front view. Hit the tab to get into edit mode for your new sphere, and then hit the 1 key again to make sure you're in the vertice mode. So now click and drag a selection box across the verts that make up the bottom of the sphere. We want to flatten the bottom of this by hitting the G and the Z or using the blue gizmo arrow to pull up the verts. What's going on here? Okay, let's orbit around and see what happened. So by default, vertices, edges, and mesh that are not visible will not be selected. Remember that last little button up with the render views? That's the X-ray mode. If you click on that or hit Alt-Z, you will be able to select stuff on the other side of your mesh. So undo if you need to and turn on the X-ray mode. Typically selecting the wireframe will also turn on X-ray mode, but you can turn it off while you're in X-ray mode, so you just double check and make sure that it's on. So now drag that selection box across the bottom half of the sphere and move them up. And then this time, all the vertices, even those on the other side, were selected and moved. So spend a few minutes moving some vertices around to get a nice organic shape. Feel free to use the proportional editing, but remember we made the influence circle very big when we were shaping the sand dunes, so you'll probably want to make them a lot smaller again using the scroll wheel or page down. And then don't forget to turn it off when you're done. And then when you're happy with your rock, hit Tab into object mode, and with the rock selected, hit Shift D to duplicate your first rock. So Shift D to duplicate, and then move it out of the mesh. It's going to put it in exactly the same spot. So to see it, you need to just move it right away. And then now you have a copy of that first rock. So do that 2 or 3 more times, and then jump into each one individually and make them unique. Don't worry about making them different sizes. We can do that later, but just kind of change the shapes of them by moving the vertices around to get 3 or 4 different shaped rocks. So now our rocks are nice and lumpy, but they still look very low poly and faceted. To make them look a lot better, we need to add a lot more geometry, but we can make them look a little better with 1 click. In object mode, select a rock, and then right click and choose Shade Smooth. That's right there in the context menu. That's not going to fix the sharp outline around the outside here, but it will smooth over all that weird sort of faceting that's going on inside of the rock, and it's going to make it look a little bit better. And then while you're at it, select your ground and do the same thing. And we should really start setting up our shot. So let's look through the camera. My new scene doesn't have a camera in it, so I'm just going to hit Tab to get into object mode and then Shift A and add a camera. If you have the default camera, you can use that one. Hit the number pad, 0. Or click on the camera icon if you don't have a number pad. The border is the boundary of our shot. That's kind of what we'll render if we were to hit render right now. If it's very small, you can use the scroll wheel to zoom in a bit or hit the home button on your keyboard to fill the viewport with your camera view. Now there are a lot of ways to move the camera around. First, I'm just going to jump out of the camera by just middle mouse dragging for a moment. That just pops you out of the camera view. And now I can use the move gizmos, or I can hit the G key and the axes that I want to lock it onto. Like I can type GY or GZ and then just move it in one direction at a time. Or I can just sort of scooch it around however I want. So just move it so that it's roughly pointing at your lantern. And now select the camera in the scene or in the outliner. And then below in the properties menu, you'll see that there's a little green camera icon. Remember, this is only going to appear if the camera is actually selected. The first thing we can do is change the focal length of our lens. So hit your 0 key on your number pad or click the camera icon to get back into your camera view so you can see what you're doing. Blender cameras mimic real world cameras pretty well. So if you've done any photography, a lot of this will look familiar. Set the focal length from the default 50mm to 30. You don't have to type in the two M's, just type in 30, enter, and then select the field and hit enter or return. Now, our shot is a bit wider view. There's a lot of fun stuff in this menu that's worth playing around with, so find the composition guides and turn on the rule of thirds guides. So let's adjust the shot a bit more. With the camera selected, we can hit the G key and move the camera around while we are looking through it. You can hit the R to rotate it, and if you hit R and Z to lock it into the Z axis, you can kind of pan the camera without accidentally like rolling it or tumbling it around. But let's hit that N key to open up that side panel. Remember that little hidden side panel? Hit the N key to open that up, and then find the View tab along that vertical right side of the viewport. Under the View tab, find View Lock, and then you'll find a little button that says Lock Camera to View. If you check this box, then any of the regular viewport navigation tools like middle mouse or alt middle and scroll wheel and all that will move the camera along with the view. Just remember to uncheck this when you're done, or the next time you make any move in your viewport, you'll lose your perfectly composed shot. There's yet another way that's really good if you use Unreal or play a lot of first-person games. Hold down Shift and click the tilde key, the one above tab there, and this moves you into walkthrough mode. Now just moving the mouse will move the camera around, and the WASD keys will move you around just like you're playing a game. Use E to raise the camera and Q to lower the camera, and as soon as you click or enter, it will pop you out of this mode. Use whatever option you like best to line up your lantern against that right third, and then hit the F12 button on your keyboard or select the render image from the render menu. And you should get a pretty murky view of your scene looking through your camera. Obviously, we need to work on lighting and add some materials, but we have almost finished the modeling for our scene. You might want to take a minute and edit your dunes a little bit to make a nice valley on either side of your shot. And you can stay in the camera view if you want to while you're doing that so you can see what looks best for your render. Go ahead and move your rocks around to put them into good places. You can make copies of those. Remember, just Control D to make a few copies. In the next video, we'll make some materials for the scene and add some light. So actually hold off on making the copies of the rocks here because we'll add the materials first. So I'll see you in the next one.